Okay, I'm going to record. Um, now, is Tyler good? Okay. I'd like it. A lot of people know me already. Some don't, but Mile is a marketing expert who also focuses on manufacturing distribution. So we decided a while ago to collaborate on this. It's an important topic. So that's what we're going to talk about is really how to make your marketing and sales pay off. That's really what we're talking about here today, and what to think about as we finish off 2025 and start to plan for 2026. I would encourage you to stop and interrupt us if you have a question, because we're going to be blasting through a lot of content here, and you may forget. We'll have time at the end, but feel free to use the chat, or you can go to the React button and raise your hand, and we'll try to pay attention to that and stop and address any questions as they come up. Okay. I am going to, let's see, there we go. Now I stopped sharing, didn't I? Tom's coming in. All right. Am I still sharing? I lost the all right, here we go. Okay. All right. So why don't we get started? Again, a lot of you guys know me already. My name's Ken Chio, and I'm the owner and president of Our Sales Coach. And we work a lot with manufacturing distribution companies, some service companies, and help them to make sure they got strategic sales plans and have processes to really get more of their ideal clients and not waste time on things that don't turn into closed business. All right. Mile, you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you. First of all, Ken, thanks for inviting me to this event. Ken and I met earlier this year, and we saw that there's some alignment here between marketing and then sales. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. My name is Maile. My last name is Ostale. I'm the CEO of Smart Finds Marketing. Our corporation's been actually around since 87, so it's been a long 38 years. I started the internet group in 94, and it's been a crazy time going through all this technology, all these changes. A lot of fun, but let's just step right into it, Ken.
Okay. All right. So again, we're talking about marketing and sales, how we can align the two. And, it's an interesting time. I find my clients really either they're booming because of tariffs or they're being adversely impacted, and either way, everybody realizes they need to be more strategic and really not really rely on what's got them where they are now.
I think,
And
yeah, I mean, I think one of the issues is as we go into 2026, there are a lot of challenges,
yeah,
and the world's changing. Technology is impacting how and what we do, especially in sales marketing. And the question is, how do we align both these groups in a way that's going to be effective? We went through a lot of changes this year as it stands. I can't wait for next year.
right. Yes. All right. So this is really what we're going to be talking about today. Uh, Marketing, what is it that is working? There's a lot of innovation now in terms of
Oh,
really,
mind-boggling. Absolutely
yeah,
mind-boggling. Let me tell you. It's like one of those things where how do we stay on top of it?
right. Yeah.
Luckily, I got a large enough team where everybody's got something going on. So
Yeah, I mean, to do market research alone, a
yeah,
lot of tools available. The AI is
yeah.
just exploding, and then in sales too, it's a lot easier to generate a good high quality list these days and get people's contact information and automate messaging, that kind of thing. But what we're really talking about here is the strategy and how is marketing and sales working together to really focus on where your best opportunities are and make your teams on both sides more efficient and more effective. And how do we integrate that? Okay.
Definitely,
And
definitely.
into a playbook that you can continuously monitor and perfect, right? And then we'll get into the Q&A. So why don't you take it away,
Why
Mile?
take it away? Yeah, it's gonna be an interesting one. So one of the things, that I think is well, that we've seen, especially in the B2B space, is this idea that hey, visibility is going to drive growth. And my position on that is if you're not measuring that visibility, this doesn't mean anything at the end of the day. Measurable results is what's going to drive growth. And the good news is with all this data, with all this technology, and especially with AI around that we're dealing with, do you have a way to utilize these resources to identify to help measure your growth and your visibility and what does that all mean at the end of the day. And so like in our case, we've used AI with our conversion rate optimization program, right? So how do we take existing website traffic and balloon it into more leads? In other words, not about driving more traffic to the website as much as we're talking about, hey, I want to make the website more effective so that we have real ROI. That's kind of the scenario. Perhaps a good case study I have, which we've been working on for the last year, is a tech company where literally we got 198% increase on a global level. And then we had a 94% growth in the US alone. The interesting thing about that project goes back to what I just said. Are you using the tools that are available in today's world to measure the results and then based on that, make decisions? That's probably the number one thing that we have to take a look at is what are all these tools? What are all the resources that I have available? And how do we, the idea is blending analytics with human strategy and using technology so that we're not doing guesswork. And based on everything that's been going on in 2025, we're at a point where you don't have to guess anymore. And the idea is as we move forward here, how does marketing create alignment that fuels the sales success? And I think what marketing is doing is becoming more important for the sales side. And so when we start talking about data driven, how marketing drives alignment, Ken, if you want to move on to the next slide. So let's talk about these 5 sections here, right? So number one is using analytics. And here's the interesting thing, and this has been getting better and better all year long. How do we use intent data to understand audiences? And this is a huge shift. The ability to be able to identify intent based on the activities of our target audience. In other words, what I'm saying is we're able to pre-qualify the leads. In other words, instead of doing mass production marketing, let's start with the intent data, and based on that, drill that down to develop qualified leads. That's kind of the direction that we're going over here. Content marketing is never going to go away. Content is king on the web. But the question is, can you use that content as thought leadership? In other words, how do we use this to build trust? That's the main thing there. We just launched after about a year of setup, trials, and testing. We just launched our Smart press release marketing program. And I will tell you that, yes, press release is about amplifying your brand developing credibility and having SEO value as well. But the B2B world is a whole different ballgame because in the press release world, especially on the internet, you're dealing with syndicators that are less than $100 that have no value. And on the higher end, you're dealing with these the big guys like the PR newswires, which are specifically designed for investor relations. So you got B2B in the middle that doesn't know what to do. And so there's a whole strategy on how that press release works for B2B. The other side of this whole thing is the whole, closed loop reporting, right? So we're trying to take the different campaigns, all this work that we're doing, and bringing it all together in such a way that we're looking at the performance of the campaigns to qualify the leads that are being generated. And I think when it comes to sales, that's the goal of marketing. It's not just about driving leads. I don't want just any leads. I remember a few years back we had a client that was getting like 200 leads a month, and I said, well, it's before we started, and I asked, well, how many of those are valuable? Oh, about 20. It's like, let's get, that's just, that's unnecessary work at the end of the day. We want to stay away from unnecessary work. And so the way that marketing has changed is this idea, this concept of doing data-driven approach, focusing on intent-based campaigns so that we can actually find, the right people who are interested in what it is that we're doing. Let's move on. So marketing can do all the work that they can. Sales can do all the work that they can. But as long as I've been in business for 40 years, I will tell you that marketing and sales have always had some type of a rift somewhere, okay? Sales blames marketing not getting the right leads. Marketing says, hey, I'm doing all this work. I'm bringing all these leads. Sales is not doing their job. And all you do is get a lot of back and forth, and the two groups not working together. As much as everybody has tried, I think it all starts at the top. Whoever is the most responsible, whether that's a CEO, it could be the vice president of a company, somebody has to actively be involved with both groups and bring both groups together, if it's on a weekly basis, whatever that looks like. The idea is let's get away from the silos, create a cross-functional team, a cross-functional collaboration so that we're being more effective. I think this idea of marketing and sales alignment is something that's absolutely important as we go into 2026, more so than maybe years past, because of the way things are changing. And let's face it, all this technology is creating a change in our society, whether we like it or not. And so, I think once marketing creates a pre-qualified demand, the question is sales has to turn that into measurable revenue, but the two have to work together. And if you allow them to work together on their own, they won't. So the question is, somebody's got to be the glue. That's essentially the way that this is going to work. And I think this is a critical part, especially for larger organizations where that cross-functional collaboration is absolutely important.
And speaking to what you're talking about, Nile, there's a whole new department now. I mean, there's the marketing department, there's the sales department. Now there's revenue operations, and particularly in
Yes,
tech.
exactly.
I mean, there's always a rev op person, and that's their job, is to measure everything and get the data where it needs to go. Get the data, analyze the data, and get it to where it needs to go, and then direct things. They're the sort of the traffic cop, if you will.
And and as you go to the next slide, I mean, I think the thing to keep in mind, like you're saying, let's face it, we got business development, we got marketing, we've got the CRO position, we have the sales position, right? All these different parts all designed to generate revenue at the end of the day and to generate an ROI, and hopefully a good ROI. But we, just to close out this marketing piece before I turn this over to Ken, I think the important thing that I'm going to mention is using data, using the tools that we have available, especially with AI. And intent data is a big one as far as the marketing side is concerned. There's lots of resources for that. That's what's going to help to generate the pre-qualified leads so that sales can move on with to be more effective, actually. Instead of spending hours with a client that says, I'm not quite sure, the lead that's walking in the door is based on the fact that they already have intent. And I think I'm going to let Ken move on from here. This as far as how do we take that intent data and move on into the sales department. Ken, take it away.
All right. So this is what I wanted to talk about here today is number one, what are your goals and how's it tied to the market? It's just real. When I first sit down with the CEO, I always ask them, okay, tell me about your goals. And, it's not uncommon for them to say, well, based on last year and what we did, I think this year we could probably do 10%, 15%. Okay. Now that may be the number. But how is that tied in with where your market opportunities are? Because if then you say, well, listen, these are my growth areas. I think if we get 5 more clients just like this, and maybe 10 more of those, then that equals 10%. Now that's a market-based assessment, at least of some sort. And so, how are you being really strategic? And it really requires an internal analysis of what are you really good at, and who is it that needs that right now, and then what's happening externally in the market that indicates that there's some growth in that area, and then you can be really specific about who you're going after and why, what they're thinking, to get their attention, and then coordinate with marketing in a much more effective way to really do the kinds of things that Mile was talking about. Okay. And then you can streamline your processes to be able to make sure that you're working with your existing customers where your best opportunities are, and your net new prospective customers in a more a concrete way, and then gain a competitive advantage. So, for example, I have a client that they make diffusers and grills for HVAC systems, and their biggest growth areas were number one, the hospitals and surgical centers, because they all the ventilation requirements changed with COVID, and clean rooms because of the growth markets in pharmaceutical and semiconductors. So, once we started to really focus on those 2 markets, we determined, that the way they're going to market, the distributors for the hospitals weren't the same people, and so we made some adjustments there. But in the clean rooms, it was really design build contractors. So that lent itself to a direct sale approach much more effectively. And so the salesperson they put in that role, she ended up doing 5 times what they expected for her last year. And then they started designing products that were more in line with what the customers wanted. So they were able to eliminate competition and really gain a competitive advantage in those areas, so it's led to more growth. Okay, but far too often, companies are really being reactive. Why? Because they've been in the business and they have customers, and the customers keep coming back to buy, and they have distributors, and the distributors are constantly giving them things to quote. Okay, and of course you want to be responsive to your existing customers, but I have a client down, contract manufacturer in New York, and they the first thing we did was take a look at their customers, and it's not uncommon. Tier 1 and tier 2 are basically 4 customers or 3 customers, and then you got tier 3, and maybe there's a dozen in there, but those are the ones we want to get more of. and which ones of those can we really grow with? And then what is our proactive plan to do that? Okay, because if we're being entirely reactive, it really limits our growth potential, because you're spending time with things that may not necessarily be the most profitable, and then you're not really being as strategic as you could be, and your time and your resources aren't being spent as effectively, right? And so you tend to be more transactional, and you're responding to stuff that comes in. And even with your outreach, when you're doing outreach, you're kind of, it's in the spray and pray approach, so you're not really as focused as you could be, more generic in your pitches, so that, really sound and look like everybody else.
This
So
is
if
more like being complacent, right? I mean, we're being complacent with the clients that we have, without and just expecting that to keep going forever.
Right, yes. And
Yeah.
so, where, I've got another client that does metrology, for example, but they've got now a bunch of new, they were purchased by private equity. They brought in a lot of new people located in different regions, and they're being a lot more proactive in, really working with the distributors, but also they're really doing a lot of outbound prospecting to try to drive the business through the distributors. Still 85% through distributors, but they're really taking a more proactive approach. And we now are working on, okay, who is it that really needs what they have to offer, and which products that they offer are the most profitable for them, and provide the best return on investment for their customers, so that we can focus on the customers that need that. And that helps us to really refine the messaging, to get people on the phone, and to conduct those sales meetings, so people are buying the more profitable products that really have a higher ROI for the customer. Okay, so that gives us a lot more ammunition for the marketing. And then, what Mile was saying about sales complaining about the marketing leads they're getting, right? When a salesperson says that to me, I say it's your fault. Okay, if you're not getting the leads to the people that you want to be talking to, then you got to go and tell them who is it that you want to be talking to, and what is going to get their attention. You're the front line. You're talking to customers. You should know what's going to get the attention of your next ideal customer, and it goes both ways. So there's got to be more, really feedback back and forth on a consistent basis.
Well, that's where that collaboration comes into play.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So we spend a lot of time talking about, marketing funnels and sales funnels. We don't spend enough time talking about the buyer's funnel, right? Of course, they need to be aware that you exist, or they can't buy from you. But if they're cruising around in stage one in status quo, by definition, the close rate in status quo is zero. Okay. So yes, they need to be aware of you, but then they need to be considering making a change. Something needs to happen that's causing them to say, do we need to address this problem? Because they don't have a problem, they're not going to switch. And so they're thinking about, should we address this? How would we address it? And what would be our strategy? Okay. Now they may be out there looking at on the web for some input into that an evaluation, and they may find your website, but then they get to the point where they're, okay, well, let's go search for alternatives. So they're doing an evaluation, and they're looking for alternatives, and then they have to decide, okay, we're going to make a change. So hopefully at that point, stage 4, you become the new status quo, and then you set up an implementation plan so everybody's expectations are met. And then in stage 6, you develop a loyal customer that wants to keep buying. Now, there's problems with this structure, and that is sales is it changed because of all of the innovations in social media and marketing automation
Mhm.
and AI that people know, first of all, that they can get all kinds of information on the World Wide Web. So that's what they do. And so they're going to do all of this research on their own without you. Okay. And so, when the corporate executive board wrote that book, Challenge Your Sale, one of the things they discovered was 57% of the buying decision has been made before the salesperson gets involved. Okay. And so there's a couple of problems with that sales funnel that I showed you, is that when they're in bucket 2, which is where you want to get to them, that's when the executives are at least 80% involved. Once they decided they're going to go into bucket 3 and start to search for alternatives, that's when they tag a lower level person. Now that's okay because you get engaged with them, but it doesn't really eliminate the requirement for you to get to the decision makers. And the other problem is that they've already made some decisions. They've made some decisions about what they want without you, maybe with what you can do without you, and what your competitors can do probably without you. So, you've got to be really careful about working with your marketing teams about what you are putting out there so that you're building trust with what they're finding. And, but really, how do we catch them when in that bucket 2, when they're
But
looking at,
you bring up a good point, Ken.
yeah,
One of the issues here is competitive advantage. That's where you have to be able to make sure you know what your competitors are doing and make sure that you find a way to be ahead of them.
exactly. Yep. And it's all about timing, right? And it's typical, like, eventually after I'm working with a salesperson, they'll come to me and say, "Hey man, I got lucky. I called somebody and they said, 'Hey, we were just thinking about making a change.'" And I always say the same thing. I'm like, the more proactive you are, the more prospecting you do on a regular basis, the luckier you get. Because the more people you talk to, the greater the chance you're going to catch somebody at the right time. And that's when the executives are involved, because they're trying to decide, what should we do. So when you catch them, then that's when they're going to want to talk to you. I sent a LinkedIn message to a CEO. It was probably a couple weeks ago, and he connected with me on LinkedIn. I said, "Hey, just curious why you decided to engage." And he says, "Well, you do sales training. It's interesting to me." So I said, "Let's meet." Thursday, I'm down there meeting in his office, meeting with him and his vice president of sales. And is that going to happen with everybody you ask for a connection? No, but
No, no, no.
it's going to happen. So, at some point in time, right? So, if the more specific you are about what they're thinking about there when they're trying to decide, if they should do something about their problem, then the more, really succinct you can be with the marketing and really help to drive that, be the right marketing and prospecting channels with the right message. Okay. Now, the other problem that we find is that, the sales processes, just end up with too much wasted time, because they're just, there's one of the biggest reasons that people stall, that projects stall, is they're just not willing or able to decide at that point. Okay. Seems pretty obvious, but salespeople don't behave like they understand that. They show up, then they
Yeah.
pitch, and they just give their presentation, and they end up sounding like everybody else, without finding out, okay, are they willing or able to decide? And sometimes it's just unqualified leads. So I mean, if you can't provide what they want, then you have to find an acceptable alternative, or just go for the no. But the question is really, are they ready to make a decision? And if they're not, maybe it's not the right time. Maybe they have other priorities. So you have to find out really what needs to happen for them to be ready to make a decision. And then you keep them engaged somehow so that you know where and when to follow up, or even should you follow up. Okay. And so through that process, then they get to the point eventually where they're emotionally connected to making a decision. And that's the problem, that salespeople take them through a process that they don't let the customer, get to that point where they're emotionally in the place where they can, you know, decide that this is the right thing to do, that there's not too much risk. And people make decisions emotionally, and they justify it logically. And so you need to have a process that enables them to do that. But going back to, timing, according to Forrester, if you catch people there when they're trying to decide if they should address the problem, when they're in the consideration phase, that's a 74% close rate. And in another survey, they talked to executives, and they all said that 75% of them said they took an appointment or attended an event based on a well-timed outbound email or call. And so, what are you doing proactively to, get people on the phone? And, that client in New York I was telling you about, first we just did a survey of their existing clients and where they should be spending their time, but then they hired another outsourced sales manager that I worked with a little bit, and he hired a salesperson, and she has just hit the ground running. I mean, she is like setting appointments with these, large corporations, and they're kind of overwhelmed with it. But she's
No,
just been really
and you bring up an interesting point. Not every salesperson is a good salesperson,
right.
and the best salespeople have discipline. In other words,
Yeah,
they know how many people they're going to call new, how many follow-ups they have, and where everybody is as far as
yeah.
their sales cycle is concerned. If you have a salesperson who's disciplined, you get the results that you're looking for.
Right. And so then you have a sales process that really enables you to really understand what's their compelling reason to do business, to change what they're doing. And it's really in the personal impact to the person you're talking to not make that change. And then are they committed to changing? This is where you eliminate the people that do nothing, and what are their alternatives to not change? What's the consequence to them? And then how will they decide? Who else is involved? Get the other decision makers involved. How will they make that decision? What are they going to base it on? And what's the process? And when they're going to do it? And then are they willing to make an investment? How much and when and how? So that it really takes the pressure off your presentation, because you already know all these things. Are they really committed to making a change? What is that's going to drive that decision? And what are the problems they're trying to solve in the first place? So you know what to present, and that you're on the same page of what the investment's going to be. Okay. So that through all of this, you really make your engagement with them more personalized. Your communication is transparent. You know when and how to follow up, and you follow through and do the behaviors you need to do. And then sales and marketing are mutually accountable for the results.
And a lot of the things that you brought up, they piggyback so well with the marketing side too. But in because we have intent data nowadays, and because we have enough information about everybody within our target audience. I don't care if it's account based, in other words, company level, or whether it's an individual within the company. The idea is that we have that data as a resource. That's what's allowing us to move, everybody through this little chart that we have over here, as far as from marketing to sales alignment, in terms of being able to use the right information to be able to get our information out to that target audience and make sure that we have that pre-qualified lead. There's several things that you mentioned during your presentation, Ken. It's like as long as what's coming, it's garbage in, garbage out. So
Yeah.
garbage in, if we have the wrong leads walking in the door, too many of the wrong leads, all we're doing is wasting our time. And the fact is, nowadays we can actually do account-based marketing. We can do pre-qualified leads. I mean, that's how we're going to move this process so that sales is ready to hit the ground running.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a good point. I had a meeting yesterday with an outsourced CFO, and he's talking about a client of his, and he was saying these guys don't even know how profitable the business is they're bringing in, and it's so that's step number one for him is like, okay, this type of business we're getting, is it the most profitable,
Yeah.
and or do we need to focus on where we can be more profitable, but sometimes
I mean, we're
if
we're you know
yeah,
we're in Michigan, we're in the Detroit metro area, so we're in as far as Michigan is concerned, we're in manufacturing central, right? And
yeah,
so you brought up an interesting the point of a client that we had. They spent almost 2 years removing the unprofitable clients that they had. In other words, they were taking on all this business. All it was doing is creating revenue. I mean, cash flow. That was it. But it wasn't profitable. Well, literally, it took them 2 years to get rid of that. And while they're getting rid of the or not taking orders on what's not profitable, they were trying to slowly bring in that which is profitable. And it's absolutely necessary.
yeah. And then if you got your marketing engine running and you are getting a lot of leads, okay, how is that being qualified? So maybe a lot of times when people say, all right, look, we need to beef up sales, so they go out and they hire a high price account executive, and maybe what they need is somebody that's actually taking those leads and qualifying them for that high price account executive they already have. and
Right.
and that's a person, or maybe they aren't getting enough leads, so they need to hire somebody like my client in New York did, somebody who can really just start to you know be more proactive, reach out to people that have maybe bought in the past, or have they've quoted in the past but not been successful with, and start setting some meetings or start prospecting for net new people they haven't talked to. Okay, and that could be a again a lower price point person that you can develop, and when they're successful then they develop. So I'm going to be working with her to really learn the business, learn the technology, and then eventually become capable of conducting her own sales meetings and closing the deal without them. Okay, and so that's really what the process is, and the tools to make her successful. They didn't have a CRM, so the outsourced sales manager put them in a CRM. So now we'll be working on getting the metrics to make sure their formula plays out the way we expect it, and we get the data to trade. Okay, and then provide that feedback back and forth to really make sure that we're doubling down on what's working and stop what's not, and then continue to improve.
Yep.
Anything more to say about this slide,
Yeah, we're
Emile?
good.
Okay. So metrics, go ahead, Emile.
Metrics. Those are always fun, and that's the good news about marketing nowadays is we have lots of metrics. I'm going to buzz through this real quickly because I would say we're running short on time somewhere.
Yeah. Yep.
So CAC, customer acquisition cost, right? In other words, how much money are we spending to acquire a client? And the idea is, can you get that above 50%? We have to take a look at the trends of a campaign by type, by department, by channels. We're taking a look at how this is all shaking out. But the question is if your CAC is $1,000 and your average customer lifetime value is, let's say, 5,000. I know I'm using small numbers here. And that would mean that we have a healthy 5-to-1 ratio, right? That's a sustainable growth. But the concept over here is monitoring your customer acquisition costs. Next one is CPL. A lot of people know this one, cost per lead. Where is how much money you're spending to get the lead? And I got a crazy example here. Just the other day, I was talking to a company, and they're telling me their cost per lead is $1,200 to $2,000, and my jaw dropped. I'm like, there's no way that your cost per lead should be that high, at least not in today's world, even for a B2B company. But this is where the concept is of that CRO program I was mentioning early on. In other words, how do we take the journey funnel of a client, let me rephrase it, the journey funnel of a website visitor, and using AI, get them to a decision phase as they repeatedly come to the website. That's going to be an important part. CRR, so customer retention rate. This is the one we were talking about a little earlier, and this is the one I was mentioning to Ken too. Is we have to go, why we want the retention to be high. What we want to avoid is being complacent because of CRR. So if our retention rate 75%, we think everything's great. Well, that's not going to last. That 75% may only be good for, and I'm just throwing out a number here, 12 months. Well, what happens when you get beyond the 12-month period? Is that customer retention rate going to stay that way? It's hard to get the customer retention rate up high, but if it's high, one thing to note: don't be complacent. Last one is more of a sales thing, but meetings to close ratio, right? How many meetings does it take for me to close a client? And the reality of that is it's going to be a little bit lower. But again, as we move into 2026, if we have sales and marketing alignment, we have CEO and executive alignment, then using intent-based data and using data-driven marketing, we should be able to get those meetings down and the close ratios up.
Yeah, that number really could vary considerably depending on the business and the type of sales environment they're in. Particularly if you're just getting business from existing customers, it should be like 90%. But with net new, obviously you can expect it to be lower. But it really depends on the business and the number of meetings. For me, it's about 2.5. Right?
Yeah.
First meeting to close a deal.
Yeah, and these stats over here are guidelines of what you might want to have these various metric points be at. And in some cases they're low, in some cases they're high. I mean, everybody's got to do it in their own direction.
Right. MQLs.
You want to take those?
No, that's your thing, marketing qualified leads. But lead to opportunity, again, it could really vary. And we need to qualify them, but we want to measure that, right? But the most important is really how many meetings are actually turning into proposals, and then how many proposals actually close. And it boggles my mind that the companies have this data, but they don't look at it every week or at least every month to determine. And it also boggles my mind that the software that is supposed to make salespeople more efficient don't automatically give you these ratios. And you'll notice that all of these metrics are measured in ratios, and it should be automatically calculated, but it's not. And so we need to somehow set it up so we get these ratios and we look at them and we watch them to make sure they're improving.
I mean, most CRM systems have the necessary data, and a lot of times the data is automatically generated, but then we lack the discipline to look at it. And then furthermore, we lack the discipline to use that data and take action.
Right, exactly.
It's a process.
Right. So really, this is what we're talking about is being more strategic, and that enables us to align marketing and sales. It is an executive involvement to drive
Mhm.
it, or it just doesn't happen. Everybody just, gets bogged down in where they are in their own silo, and that leverage that data and share feedback back and forth on a regular basis, so that you can build those processes and always be looking to improve. And that's pretty much it. So let's open it
We
up to
covered a lot of
questions.
ground in a short amount of time.
Yeah. Uh, so should we,
Does anybody have any pain points related to what we've been talking about?
I'm going to stop sharing so we can open it up so I can see.
Sure.
Um, you know, I guess, you know, what is it that's sort of driving home for you guys? Or does anybody have any questions about some of the things that we talked about?
Uh, on our at Gustavo, it's the follow up. A lot of sales guys, they go up. I call it show up and throw up. They get out there, blah 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 blah, and then the customer asks for a quote, and qualification is always a question. Uh, so we talk about having a quote, and I tell them not to send the quote unless they want to sit down and have you explain it. And that drives them crazy. I said, if the guy's not willing to spend 15 minutes, 20 minutes with you to explain your quote, then they're not buying it. They just need the quote because they need 3 quotes and so on and so forth. So that is the biggest, right now we have probably more customers than we can handle, which is a good problem to have, but it's still a problem. That's why we're trying to automate some of that stuff too. But it's just, getting the salespeople, as I think you said it earlier, Melee, is the discipline, have a plan. It's hope isn't a strategy, as they say, but we have sales meetings on Monday morning. It's been the way I've been for 30 years, either on the sales side or managing sales. You should be able to spout off exactly what you're doing in the next 5 days. Um, and some of the guy, well, and I could tell just by because the sales manager I had years ago, he would look at you, and if you hesitated, you were in big trouble. So you had to know your stuff, and I've always been a Monday morning, talk to the sales guys and sales team, and have a plan and be disciplined, stick to the plan, and you have good days and bad days, as we all know in sales.
Well, I mean, the other part of it is the discipline part kind of ties into what Ken was talking about earlier, in terms of the emotion. But when we talk about emotion, when it comes to sales and marketing, what we're really saying is patience. And that is, a salesperson has to have patience as well, which most salespeople
Yeah,
don't.
yeah,
It's
patience
like,
and
and
learn to listen.
yeah, and
Yeah,
Ken said it well earlier when he was saying that, the salesperson uh, isn't, well, they're not listening, right? They want to
Yeah.
take action and they're not paying attention. And all you're doing is driving that prospect away at that point. But
Well,
discipline and patience, sure,
yeah.
top of the list.
And in Dom's case, I've been working with Dom for like, I don't know, since 2015, I think, or 2017. Anyway,
at least, yeah,
he hired me for one. He's got 2 different markets, and how his products are sold in those 2 markets are completely different with different people, and some are in the same company, but and it complicates it. But you know, initially he hired me because he had 3 salespeople, and one was like, no problem, still isn't. The other one was what he called bull in the china shop. And then the third one was a problem, right? And the point is that they were all in different places. Okay. And the top producer was doing everything he needed. And so, how often do we just take a look at it? Okay, what's making that person successful? And let's train up the other people to get to that point. But what happened over time is those same 3 people started to stop wasting time, throwing proposals out there and not getting anything out of it. They stopped doing that and they started to really perfect their system. Now those same 3 people are doing 3 times the volume, but a lot of that's because they were able to go up in the decision tree and they are dealing with people at a higher level in those customers. And so they're lining all the jobs up. They're bigger projects. And now he's got 2 more people in that division doing sales. Okay. And, you know, but the one that took a little bit longer to get it, you know, he required a lot more coaching. He finally got it. Now he's killing it.
I think another, you said it earlier about, you know, follow the leader. You should collaborate more. And I think when he said this as well. We're a product of our environment. And some of these salespeople, they like to be lone soldiers. I'm going to do my thing and I'm going to do it my way. It doesn't work. And then when they start collaborating and they started to be, you know, products of their environment, hanging with Ed and you know, listening and understanding your teammates, and then they go out and do that and like, wow, this really works. And that's another thing that salespeople love to just be on their own. You know, I don't need to come in the office. I don't need to do anything. So that was another kind of hidden gem in there that you should hang out together and discuss the good and the bad with each other versus, you know, the talking head telling you what to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Does anybody else have any questions? Kent, do you have salespeople, or tell us a little bit about your business? Not sure I've ever met you. You do laser cutting? Are you there? Oh,
Yep. I
okay.
may have stepped away.
Oh, all right. Well, we have 5 minutes left.
Actually, this is Frank. I do have a
Oh.
question.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm a, you know, single, business owner here, you know, offering marketing consulting services to small, medium businesses. And, you know, kind of what I found is there are, and early on in your presentation, you talked a lot about, you know, getting the CEO aligned and engaged in kind of sponsoring, making sure that sales and marketing are collaborating. You know, sometimes in at least my target market, right? I mean, the CEOs are maybe just too distracted and don't have the patience. So how do you break through that where they don't know what they don't know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my first thought is some of these guys sit down with the CEO, and this is where Ken comes into play, and talk to them about what is their priority. And their priority should be to make sure the sales team and the marketing team are aligned and be that glue. It doesn't require a lot of effort on their part, theoretically. And what I mean by that is, look, have a meeting once a week, whatever, 15, 30 minutes, right? Just make sure everybody's talking to each other. If you can get them to do that for 3 months, Sociology 101 says that it'll become habit. That's all about how long it takes most human beings to get used to something, right? We have to find a way to get to a point where something's habit. The CEO needs to figure this out for about 90 days.
Yeah.
And
That's
then
a really,
the 2 teams will start to work together.
yeah. It's a really common problem with small businesses, you know, and I will say, you know, sometimes I get a CEO who says, look, if I get the right salesperson, I don't need to manage them. You know, I don't want to be involved in sales. That's a failed attempt to start. If they don't want to, they won't, and it will not be as successful, and it could fail, you know. And
Exactly.
you know, what made me think when you were asking that question is, you know, I work so collaboratively with some people that do these EOS implementation. I don't know if you know, and it's
Yep.
great they're real successful because what they do is they get people to focus on the big rocks. Okay. Do not get distracted. What is it that you need to focus on now? And then they go in there and they get the whole team focused on what are those big rocks. And this is what we're doing. I know you could do that. No, we're doing this. And it works. It's very effective in getting, because they're, for me, it's even worse for like service companies. Or I have one client that's a bit large mechanical contractor. Okay. And once they get the job, they have to manage the job. Well, there's only so much bandwidth they have, because as soon as they get he gave me this new person who they took out of project management, put him into sales, and gave him an $8 million quota. Now he's tracking about, he could do like 12, but he's just so bogged down in project management right now that I'm like,
Can't be a
Well,
sales guy.
again, the whole thing goes back to discipline, right? It's
Yeah.
like, what am I like EOS? The concept of EOS is to create that discipline within the organization, number one, and to create that alignment across the entire team, not just sales and marketing, but also into operations, et cetera, or the executive branch and then down into the rest of the company. But it does require discipline. There's no question about it.
but you also have to look at the big picture. Okay. So what is my next real strategic hire? How can I get myself out underneath? I have a client that does medium voltage transformers and switchgear. And, I started off with him just doing coaching once a month, just to, figure out, sort things through. And now he's brought in 4 people, strategic hires since then, and it's, so, sometimes that's what you need to do, is just figure that out. And
and you say, and you use a
get-
good word there, strategic hire.
yeah,
It's
right.
important.
Yeah. All right. Well, we ran the course of time here, so
Yeah.
really appreciate everybody.
Thank you very much, guys.
participating.
I hope it
Thank
was
you.
helpful.
Nice,
Yeah.
New
nice work.
Thank
perspectives.
you. Thank you, everybody.